All right, so you've got questions about hybrid heat pumps in Europe. And we've got answers. We're going deep into this report from the Regulatory Assistance Project. It's called One Foot in the Past, the role of hybrid heat pumps in Europe.
Oh, yeah, I've seen this one.
It just came out last month in October. And it really digs into how these hybrid systems might fit into Europe's big push for clean energy. But the big question is, are hybrids really a step towards a greener future? Or is this going to keep us stuck with fossil fuels?
Yeah, it's a question a lot of people are asking right now, especially as Europe is trying to decarbonize heating and reach those climate targets everyone's talking about. This report really gets into the heart of that debate.
For sure, for sure. Okay, but before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's start with the basics. What exactly is a hybrid heat pump? For someone who's never even heard of it.
Okay, so in the simplest terms, it's a system that combines an air-to-water heat pump with a gas boiler.
Okay.
Now, you might be thinking, what's an air-to-water heat pump?
Yeah.
It's different from the kind of heat pump you might see cooling a room. It actually takes heat from the outside air and uses it to heat water. And then that water can be used for things like radiators or underfloor heating.
Interesting. So it's like a two-in-one heating system. But why are we focusing on gas hybrids specifically?
Good question. This report really zooms in on gas hybrids because they're meant to replace the most common heating system in all of Europe, the gas boiler. It's a tough one to replace.
I can imagine.
It's kind of like they're trying to replace a blockbuster movie. They need to come up with a really good sequel.
I get it.
Yeah.
So now the report talks about two main types of these hybrid setups, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there are add-on systems, which are kind of like you're adding a sidecar to your existing gas boiler.
Okay.
And then you've got package systems where the heat pump and the boiler come already integrated into one unit.
Got it. So we've got our hybrid setup. But what's the big appeal? Why are people even thinking about these things?
Well, on the surface, hybrids seem to offer like a gentler transition away from those fossil fuels. Like imagine you've got an older home that's not very well insulated. A full heat pump upgrade might be a huge project. Super expensive too.
Yeah, I could see how a hybrid could be tempting in that situation. It's like dipping your toes in the water.
Yeah.
Without having to do a full renovation.
Exactly. And this report actually brings up another possible advantage. As Europe electrifies its heating, all those heat pumps could put a strain on the electricity grid. So hybrids might be able to ease that strain because they can switch to gas when the demand for electricity is really high.
So they're like a safety valve for the grid.
Yeah.
But isn't that still relying on fossil fuels? Which kind of defeats the purpose of trying to go green?
You're right. That's one of the main criticisms of hybrids, and this report talks about that directly. They actually question whether the benefits of hybrids are based on shaky assumptions, like what if the price of gas just explodes in the future? Suddenly that hybrid system doesn't look so cost-effective anymore.
That's a good point. And what about the climate impact? Isn't a full heat pump always going to be better for the environment?
Well, it depends. The report really digs into this, and the answer is actually really complicated. If you're in a country with a really clean electricity grid, like France, where they use a lot of nuclear power, then, yeah, heat pump's going to be better for emissions every time.
But there's always a but.
Always. In countries where they're still using a lot of coal for electricity, like in parts of Germany or Poland, it gets a lot more complicated. In those cases, a hybrid might actually have lower emissions during those really cold periods when the heat pump has to work extra hard.
Wow. So it's not as simple as I thought. It seems like how good a hybrid is for the environment really depends on where you live and how clean your electricity is.
Exactly. It all comes down to context.
For sure. So we've talked about the grid and the climate.
Yeah.
But what about the people actually using these systems? What's it like to live with a hybrid heat pump day to day?
That's a great question. It's an important one. Sure, installing a hybrid might be less disruptive, especially in an older home. But then you're stuck maintaining two different systems, which can be a real pain.
Oh, yeah, I bet. Two sets of maintenance schedules. Two things that could break down. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and the report also looks at the cost. Unless electricity is a lot more expensive than gas, a hybrid's probably going to cost you more to run than just getting a standalone heat pump. You're basically paying extra for that gas backup.
And can you imagine going through the whole process of installing a hybrid?
Yeah.
Only to find out a few years later
Yeah.
that you need to upgrade to a full heat pump anyway.
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch is right.
That's a real concern, especially since heat pump technology is changing so fast. What might seem like a good compromise today could be totally outdated in a few years.
So after weighing all these factors, are hybrid heat pumps a good idea?
Well, the report doesn't give a simple yes or no answer. They say that hybrids could be a good choice in certain specific situations. But overall, they recommend focusing on making those full heat pumps more attractive and easier for people to install.
That makes sense. If we're serious about getting rid of fossil fuels for heating, we need to make it super easy for people to switch to clean options. But how do we encourage that transition? What are the best ways to do it? That's what we'll talk about next.
Well, the report actually highlights a few key strategies. They say financial incentives could really help, especially for people who might not be able to afford a heat pump upfront. Things like rebates, tax breaks, that sort of thing.
Yeah, those upfront costs can be a deal breaker. It's like, those electric cars are supposed to be better for the planet, but then you see the price tag.
Exactly. Financial incentives can help close that gap and make heat pumps more affordable for more people. The report also talks about making the installation process easier. Like, imagine if getting a heat pump was as easy as ordering something online.
Oh man, speaking of online orders, did I ever tell you about the time my fridge broke down? In the middle of summer, it was a total nightmare. But anyway, yeah, back to heat pumps. I guess what you're saying is make it simple, make it easy, and more people will make the switch.
Exactly. No one wants a complicated process. And along with those practical steps, public awareness is super important. A lot of people still have the wrong idea about heat pumps. They think they only work in warm climates, or that they're too expensive to run.
To be honest with you, I used to think the same thing. I thought they were just like fancy air conditioners. I had no idea they could actually heat a whole house.
A lot of people don't.
Especially in colder places.
That's why education is so key.
Right.
We need to bust those myths and give people the facts about heat pumps, like how they work and how much money they can save.
So it's like a multi-pronged approach. Make them affordable, make them easy to install, and educate the public. Sounds like a pretty good plan. But let's go back to the energy grid for a second. You were saying earlier that a lot of new heat pumps could put a strain on the system. What does this report say we should do about that?
Well, one idea they talk about is demand flexibility. Imagine if your heat pump was smart enough to preheat your home during off-peak hours when electricity demand is lower, and often cheaper too.
So instead of everyone blasting their heat pumps at 6 p.m. when they get home from work, we'd be spreading out the demand over the whole day.
Exactly. And the report gives some interesting examples from the UK, where these demand flexibility programs have actually been successful in reducing peak energy demand.
Wow, that's pretty cool. It's like we're all doing a big energy dance, making sure all our moves are in sync.
I like that analogy.
Thanks. But what about the climate impact? We were saying how it depends on a country's energy mix. Does the report give any advice on how to make sure these heating transitions actually lead to less emissions?
Yeah, definitely. They emphasize that just switching from gas boilers to hybrids isn't enough to get those big climate benefits. We need to clean up the electricity grid itself. We need to phase out those coal-fired power plants and replace them with renewable energy like wind and solar.
Right, so it's not just about the tech in our homes, it's about the whole energy picture.
Exactly. And as those grids get cleaner, the benefits of switching to heat pumps, even standalone ones, are going to become even clearer.
So it's a win-win. Cleaner energy and lower emissions.
Exactly. And the report even says that heat pumps can help bring more renewable energy into the grid.
Really? How does that work?
Okay, so because heat pumps can be controlled remotely, imagine there's a ton of extra wind power on a really windy day. Grid operators could use smart technology to tell all those heat pumps to switch on and use that extra energy to heat homes.
So we'd be using that wind energy instead of letting it go to waste. It's like turning all our heating systems into giant batteries.
I like that analogy. That's a great way to put it. And that's just one example of how heat pumps can be a big part of a future powered by renewable energy.
This is all so interesting.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, it's a lot to take in. What would you say to someone listening to all this and thinking, okay, this sounds good, but where do I even start?
Well, first I'd say don't worry too much. This whole transition to cleaner heating, it's a journey. We're all learning as we go.
That makes me feel better.
Yeah.
So what would be a good first step?
I'd say start doing your research. Learn about all the different kinds of heat pumps, see what kind of incentives are available where you live, and find some good installers who can help figure out what you need.
That sounds like a good plan. But I know some people are probably thinking, what about the people who just can't afford to switch to a heat pump? Even with those incentives, won't they get left behind in this whole energy transition? It's an important question. We can't forget about those people.
Yeah, you're right. We can't just leave people behind. It's a really important point. And the report actually talks about that too. They say this transition has to be fair for everyone.
I completely agree. We need to make sure that everyone benefits from cleaner heating, not just the people who can afford to buy all the new tech. It's about finding ways to make this work for people with different incomes and different types of homes.
So what kind of solutions are we talking about here?
Well, for one thing, we need to make sure those financial assistance programs are actually helpful for the people who need them most. Maybe that means offering bigger subsidies or grants, or even trying out new ways to pay for these things, like on-bill financing,
I've heard of that.
where the cost of the heat pump
Yeah.
gets paid off little by little through the money you save on your energy bills. So it's like spreading out the cost over time to make it more affordable.
Right. And we also need to think about renters. What about the people who don't own their homes? They don't always get to choose what kind of heating system they have.
It's a really good point. It's not just about individual choices. It's about making sure the whole system is set up fairly.
Exactly. We need to look at building codes, work with landlords to encourage them to upgrade, and just find ways to make sure everyone benefits from lower energy bills and a cleaner environment.
It's a big challenge for sure, but at least there are people working on it.
Yeah, there's a lot of innovation happening, and I'm optimistic. I think we can find ways to make this transition work for everyone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want listeners to take away from our conversation about hybrid heat pumps in Europe?
Let me think. I think the biggest takeaway is that this isn't a simple issue. There's a lot to think about. And the best solution might be different in different places. But at the end of the day, we need to move away from those fossil fuels and start using cleaner, more sustainable ways to heat our homes. Hybrids might be part of the solution sometimes, but in the long run, we should be aiming to make those full heat pumps the best choice for everyone.
Well said. And you've also made it clear. This isn't just about technology, it's about people. We need to make sure this energy transition is fair.
Absolutely.
And that everyone benefits.
It's an ongoing conversation.
For sure.
I'm sure we'll be talking about this more in the future.
I can't wait. This has been a really fascinating look at a complex topic. I feel like I've learned so much. Thanks for joining us today.
It was my pleasure. And for everyone listening, if you're thinking about upgrading your heating system, do your research, ask questions, and find a solution that works for you and your budget. The future of heating is electric, and we can all be a part of building a cleaner world.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for listening, everyone. And we'll see you next time.